everyone, and welcome to the .NET Core Podcast, a podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Caprogman-Taylor, and in this episode I talked with Tanya Janka about building application security into your projects and when to do it, regardless of the tech stack involved. Tanya and I also chat about some of the common attack vectors like SQL injection, CSRF, sometimes called CSRF, and SSRF, and mitigations like content security policy. We also talk about some of Tanya's bugbears regarding some of the permissions that apps request even though they don't need them. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So thank you ever so much, Tanya, for being on the show. It is a great pleasure to talk to you. I've read your book, which we'll talk about in a moment, and I've missed. I think at this point there's been a few streams where you've talked through some of the chapters. I've missed them completely because unfortunately life gets in the way. But we'll talk about those in a minute. But thank you ever so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jamie. This is great.
Thank you. So I was wondering, can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? They may know already from the episode title that you're into DevSecOps and AppSec. So I was just wondering, could you give us a little brief introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to be a dev. So I wrote code and made apps for a really long time. And then I met an ethical hacker or penetration tester. And he said, you should work in security. And I said, no way. Being a dev is the best ever. But after a year and a half of him slowly convincing me it was fun and interesting, I switched over to security. And very quickly, I figured out that although pen testing is pretty cool and it is fun to find bugs and smash things, that the part that I was really good at was being kind of that bridge between the security team and the dev team and like helping the devs make secure software and just spending lots of time with devs. And so, yeah, I also found out training's really expensive. So I started speaking at conferences just so I could get in for free. And I still do it because having a free ticket to a conference, like, it's awesome. And anyway, so I kept speaking and writing blogs. And one day someone said, why don't you write a book? And I said, me? What? No. But eventually it made sense. And so, yeah, so now I run a training company full time where I teach people about how to create secure software, whether they're doing DevOps or Agile or Waterfall. And turns out that's really fun because I still get to do lots of techie stuff and I still get to hang out with lots of devs. But I also get to share knowledge with people for a living. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. I have to say, the first project that I had where we had to get someone in to do some penetration testing on it and test all the code for security issues, I was like, okay, you've got to teach me how you did that because I want to know all of these things, you know? And that's where I first heard about OWASP, which I guess we can mention a little later, which is a great community of people who putting all this research into place. Because that's one of the, I tell you what, I'll talk about that in a moment. But let's talk quickly about WeHack Purple and the book, I guess, because those are quite important.
Okay. So the book I wrote is called Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. And it's basically, if you don't know anything about how to create secure software, by the end, you should know how. That's my hope. And I also wanted to make it kind of an easy and fun to read book because I want all the knowledge from a textbook to be in my brain, but the actual act of reading a textbook, I find to be sort of like a very slow, painful, frustrating, long experience. And so my book is a little bit different than the average textbook where there's stories of things that happened to Alice and Bob. So you can see what it's like for a real person, if that makes sense, perhaps someone you know when you make these security decisions. And then I tell stories from my career, and then I have like little tips and tidbits all throughout it with the hopes to break it up so that it's not just this giant wall of text.
Mm.
So that was my goal in making the book, and the feedback's been pretty good so far. So that's awesome. And then We Hack Purple is the company that I started. And so the company, we have on-demand training. So at our academy, which is online and self-paced with like videos and exercises and articles and everything. But we also have an online community where you can go and basically meet lots of other people that are just like you that want to learn. And some of the people in there are very advanced. So we have more advanced talks or discussions, if that makes sense. And then we have people that are less advanced, and we have like content that will drip to your inbox. So if you're a beginner, you're like, send me beginner stuff only, or, send me only cloud security or only DevSecOps. And we have like events where we do stuff together. And yeah, it's kind of like my favorite place on the internet. And we have a podcast. So we have the We Hack Purple podcast. And the first season is me interviewing just all sorts of different people with different jobs in information security. So not just my niche, partially because like I'm just really curious. And I really like to know about all the different types of jobs. Like I find forensics absolutely fascinating. And so being able to ask, someone that's worked in that for a really long time, everything about it, how they got that job. Um, I'm not exactly sure what next season's going to be about yet. It's probably going to be AppSec. I mean, let's face it. But yeah, so it's pretty exciting. We just started actually giving live virtual training as well. And that is, it's interesting because it costs a lot more money, but people buy it way more, or companies buy that, if that makes sense, and individuals buy the online training. It's interesting. Companies are like, why would we buy online training when we can buy you? And I was surprised by that. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can show up places virtually. I can virtually safely show up places. Yeah. So starting your own company is hard.
No, I agree completely. I agree completely. So one of the things that I wanted to say is that we haven't really done application security on this podcast, and I know that like I don't want to say fundamentals because I'm worried that means that people will take that to mean the basic stuff, but I mean like the actual everything about application security. It fits regardless of the technology you're using, right? If you're JavaScript, .NET, if you're Go, if you're C++, Assembler, whatever. So I feel like even though this show is specifically about .NET, although it's called .NET Core, because they recently rebranded, I feel like hopefully what we're going to talk about is relevant, and that this really is the first time that we're covering app security. We did talk about keeping like your build server safe because of if you're pulling in libraries and stuff, you don't know what's in that code, and in fact there have been a few times. Node packages that have Bitcoin miners that just sit and mine whilst it's building. So, that's a separate issue, I think. And we've talked about that with Niels Tanyas, episode 69. Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're still interested, check that one out. But I'm not trying to drive people away from this conversation. We need to talk about this, right? So I feel like this is going to be a leading question, right? We're going to start off with a relatively easy one, right? We all know about the SDLC, the Software Development Lifecycle. Where in that does security come into it, right? Where should I, if I'm starting a new project, where in that loop should I be involving decisions about app security?
So I realize it's a loaded question because everyone doesn't agree with me yet. But with the book Alice and Bob, I'm hoping eventually everyone does. And so I believe that there should be at least one security activity in every phase of the system development lifecycle so that that phase is secure. So let's say, you're going to build a web app. Well, I have some web app security requirements that I would like to add to your project. Or if you're doing design, I'd really love to, meet with the team and threat model. So like talk about, if you were going to hack your app, how would you do it? Or a business person, like what keeps you up at night? And then I want to go and make sure those things can't happen. or even just standing with the tech team and whiteboarding out what their architecture looks like and then saying, oh, here to here, is that encrypted? Cool. When it gets there, do you authenticate and then authorize? Like, do you figure out like, oh, and they're like, oh no, it's our API. I'm like, are you sure? And so adding in those little things to just make sure everything goes well, right? And oh, I see you're doing this and this for security. There's three other options I can think of. You haven't built it yet. Like, do you want to look at all three and then figure out which one you like the best? Or sometimes one's cheaper, or it's going to take a lot less time, or there's less compromise, etc. And so then during coding, there's a lot of security you can do. So yeah, basically, I feel that security should be there at the kickoff meeting, ideally for each project. Be like, hi, I'm your security person. If you have questions, just come ask me. And each phase, I'm going to show up and be like, hey, what's up? I see you're doing testing. Cool. I've already scheduled some stuff for you.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Because we have, I mean, you said yourself, you started out just doing development. I don't want the just to be loaded there, but
Yeah.
you started out doing development and you've transitioned over to so the whole security for applications, cybersecurity, info security is a huge thing, right? No one's going to know it all in the same way that no one's going to know everything about development, right? But I think I agree with you. We have this thing, we all have this thing about the further away from a developer's keyboard a bug is found, the more expensive it is to fix. Is that the same with security? Again, I feel like it's a loaded question, but let's just get these ones out of the way, right?
Yeah, so the earlier you find any type of bug, including security bugs, the cheaper it is. But the one thing about security bugs that's extra special compared to a regular bug is that, so I mean, if your team finds it after you've deployed the code, it's going to be expensive to fix. But if a malicious actor finds the vulnerability before your team, it's just off the charts how much that can potentially cost. Sometimes when people say, oh, but adding that security layer, Tanya, is going to be really expensive, we'll talk about, okay, so if there was a breach, what would that cost? And is the risk of, spending $8,000 on adding like a WAF or whatever the thing is that I'm recommending versus, so if this is taken down for a day, I don't know if you saw, but yesterday a ship got stuck in a canal, right? And I guess it was trying to turn around or something. I don't know exactly what happened, but now it's stuck. And so no ships can go back and forth. And that is a lack of availability. So when we talk about security, we're always like confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so like your app's down, so that ship is down. Every other ship is down. And sometimes when you take an app down, that means a lot more is down than you realize, right? Like, first of all those devs are freaking out and working on that, so they're not working on their other projects. There's a security incident. Well, the security team can kiss goodbye their next 2 weeks. All their projects are delayed now. All these other things are not getting done because we're all worried about this emergency that has occurred. And you better believe it, those ships, lots of stuff is happening that we can't see, right? And it's the same with any industry. So you take away the availability, you need to measure that. So like, how bad would that be? Okay, so my suggestion to put this on costs this much, but the risk is that how likely is that risk to happen, et cetera. And then we talk about it, and then sometimes they find the money and sometimes they don't, or we decide on kind of like compromise halfway in between. And that is a lot of your job doing AppSec, is like compromising and finding a way where, the devs can still do their jobs. The apps still function, they're still usable, but you are not like crying in bed all night being like, I'm going to lose my job when we get breached for sure because the scary is so bad.
Mm-hmm.
Because we worry about that. That's not thing a lot of people outside of security might know, but there's like a lot of stress involved. If there's a very poor app that's in prod, I worry about it. Like, please, can I just get the money for the WAF this quarter and not wait until next quarter? Because that's like 90 more days of danger. Or like, I know I've said WAF a lot. That's like a Band-Aid that you put on instead of writing really good code.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something in your book that you talk about a responsibility sign-off sheet. I forget the official term,
Risk
but
sign-off sheet.
thank you. Sorry. So I was 3/4 of the way there, right?
Oh, you're amazing.
I got it completely wrong. It's fine. But I love this idea of saying, hey, I have identified this problem. Here is what I think it would cost to fix it. Here are, like you were saying, here is the potential cost if a malicious person gets hold of it, or perhaps if you live in a state or a country where there are fines. Over here in the UK, we've got the GDPR, right? And in the EU as well. They can take a huge chunk of your profits for the whole year, or £1 million or multi-million pound fine, just because, again, body quotes, but just because your system has been hacked and user data has been exfiltrated. So if you put that to someone and say, look, I know it's going to cost $8,000. And I love this idea that you have of, here's this document, you put your name to it, manager person.
That you accept this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, a few years ago with a client, I was explaining, so I was on a project for something else, like they wanted me to do some other thing. And I said, I need to explain the threat model of what you're doing right now. And I'm like, the likelihood of a data breach happening is low, but your company will be over because the data you're collecting is so sensitive and so not in, so like for instance with Cambridge Analytica, so this is not related to them whatsoever, but like when that data, like that company's gone, no one wants to, and Facebook's, finally the normals understood how much Facebook was spying on them, the people who are not really interested in privacy and security. And so it damaged their reputation. It cost them a ton of money in reputation and deleted accounts and all of that. And I remember telling the client, I'm like, your business will be done. It will be over. It is catastrophic risk. And so I'm telling you not to store this in that third party place and that you need to do it in your own system behind your own network, that the risk is too great. And and it was very sensitive data. And I'm like, what if this third party has an employee and they have an ethical concern about what you're doing? And so they actually ended up canceling the entire project and just like not doing the thing at all because there was such catastrophic risk. And I remember one of them saying, like, do you think we don't know that? We're not stupid. And then the other one saying, I didn't know that. And then them telling me 2 weeks later, we've canceled it completely. We're not going to gather that data. It turns out there are ethical issues there. And like, it's not for me to tell them you shouldn't do that from an ethical standpoint, but I'm like, if your customers found out you did that, how would they feel? And they're like, well, they won't find out. I'm like, but what if they did?
Yeah.
And I feel like just a conversation with a security person to understand the different ways that risk could be affecting them, just a half an hour to an hour conversation once in each project could change the course of the project so dramatically for the better, right? Like for the better for that company. And it's not that security people don't want you to do this or we don't want you to do that. It's that we don't want our company to ever be in the news for reasons other than doing a good job and selling a great product and whatever other positive things, right? I never want a company that I am doing work with to be in the news for a data breach or for, a gross violation of privacy or whatever, right? It's like, because that reflects on me as an individual, but also, when people work in security, it's because that's part of our value system usually. Like there's a small percentage of people that are just like, I want money, so I work in security, but a very large percentage you will find of people where like it really matters to them on a personal value level to protect others. And so, yeah. Anyway, I have a lot of feels on the topic.
No, I totally understand. I feel like if developers, designers, project managers, whoever, if they spent more time thinking about how is this going to affect the user, or even just asking the question, do we really need this data? A lot of people, until things like GDPR, and is it CISPR? I know that California or Florida has their own. There's lots of different rules around the world about what data you can collect. And I think that until these regulations came out, a lot of people were like, no, we'll take your phone number and your social security and your mother's maiden. We don't need it, but we'll take it. We'll have all this data. And it's like, like you said, it just takes a person to step up and go, you realize what this means? if
Well, and
our
think
data
about who you
gets.
could sell it to,
Mhm.
because you would be shocked at what they sell about us. The company DuckDuckGo recently, so they put in a request to Google. I don't know if you saw it, to ask just exactly what do you collect on us when we use your product. When we search something in Google.com, what do you collect? And they did, I guess, some sort of like legal request. And then Google gave it to them, and it was, it was so you can look that up if you want to
Mhm.
feel afraid and know why I always use DuckDuckGo unless DuckDuckGo has failed me, which is very rare, and it's usually only if I'm doing like very in-depth research on a very niche thing, and then I'm like, okay, I need to consult more search engines than just this one. But if I'm going to the hardware store, or I'm trying to book a, I don't know, some sort of appointment, it's just I can trust DuckDuckGo with that. They're not going to tell everyone, did you know Tanya dyes her hair? It's not really purple. Yeah, but anyway, I feel like privacy is a thing that I wish that privacy and ethics is a thing that we could teach software developers alongside security. Because, yeah, I remember so I live in Victoria, Canada, which is, it's a beautiful island off the West Coast, just above Seattle. And I wanted to install their parking app, and the privacy violations of things that they wanted. So I tweeted at them, and they're like, oh, it's in line with our privacy statement. I'm like, so yes, you need to know my geographical location because you want to see that I did park my car there. Okay, sure. That's reasonable. And you want to know the time? Okay. But it wanted access to my photos. It wanted access to my contacts. And I was like, no. And they're like, well, then you can't have our app. And they're making it less and less easy to put cash into a meter, right? They're trying to make it so you have to use the app. And I'm just like, no, no, no. Actually, that reminds me, I should hassle them online about it some more.
Fighting the good fight. I like it. So there's lots of things about privacy there, and I do think that because we developers are kind of the last line of defense, we should be able to, like you were saying, stand up and say, "Hey, look, I don't think this is right. I don't think we should be tapping into someone's photographs or their video because all we want to do is log that they have parked somewhere, or saying, do we really need to capture this information?" But I guess that's something that we should be teaching our developers, the current generation and the next generation, whatever I hate to use the word generation because I'm worried that it becomes like an ageism term, but all the developers should at least be able to feel comfortable having these conversations and saying, do we really need to do this? Is this really required?
I
But I
also
guess,
feel like,
sorry.
oh, I'm sorry. I feel
No, no.
like part of the reason that they put all their permissions is because then everything just works. Does that make sense? And so
Yeah.
if it just works, they're like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to turn anything off in case it will break it. And it's like, no, we really need to do least privilege at all times. So the least amount of permissions that you need to accomplish your job is how many you should have. And that applies to your apps. So maybe it would be nice if your app had all 20 permissions and it would work really easily. But if you only really need 2 to get your job done, then that's how many you should do, because then you're only endangering those 2, right? And like you've just reduced your amount of permissions by 90%. And when I was a dev, I was like, it works. That's my job, is to make it work. But as a security person, I now understand it's my job to ensure not only that it works, that it keeps working, that it works correctly, and that no one can mess with it, right? And that if something's a secret, it stays a secret, and all these other security factors. I want to make sure that no one can make it work in a way it's not supposed to. And that's not a lesson they're really teaching in universities or boot camps, which is frustrating. And that's why I wrote the book, because you do not make money writing a book. So anyone that's listening, you're like, oh, I'm going to make lots of money. Unless you're someone like Obama that's super famous, or Oprah, like Oprah writes a book, it doesn't matter. She could write anything she wanted, but people are like, it's Oprah, right? But I am not those people. And no one is going to just shell out $50 for a book unless it's actually really good. And you make very, very, very little money on textbooks. But I wanted it to exist because I went to college in the late 90s and there was nothing on security. And people tell me now that there's still almost nothing. Or if there is, it only has to do with access management and maybe a little bit of network stuff. But there's never in their software development classes how to do the right thing. Like, oh, hello world. So do you know the Hello World program that they teach everyone everywhere? It literally teaches you how to ensure your app has cross-site scripting. So the first thing you do is how to output something to the screen. Perfect, great. But the second thing is always, let's get the person's name from them. And we don't tell them about the dangers of getting input and how you should make sure it's what it's supposed to be. And then we immediately reflect it to the screen without outputting coding or any sort of protections. And then it's like, thank you. You just programmed reflected cross-site scripting. And literally, this is the first lesson we teach every single dev. And do we need to teach security the very first day? Maybe not, but there needs to be a second part of that that explains, okay, so there are things that aren't safe on the internet, right? And so how can we make this a more secure lesson? So hello, secure world, right? And it's just, yeah, boot camps all over the planet, everywhere. They're just teaching everyone how to make insecure software. They're teaching them how to do it wrong. And it makes me want to pull my hair out.
I think that's the big problem though, because it's, you were saying there about, hey, we'll get all the permissions, right? It's like the very first time that you ever put a content security policy on a web app. You put the content security policy on and nothing works. And you sit there, I mean, I'm a follically challenged gentleman, so I sit there and pull what's left of my hair out trying to get the website to work again. Because I've told it only allow resources from these particular places. And then you end up with a content security policy that then has unsafe inline. And it's like, well, what's the point?
Yeah, they set it to star. They're like, everything's okay. No, everything's actually not okay.
Exactly, yeah. There's a reason that you've created that allow list, right?
Yeah. So this podcast is the .NET podcast. And you were talking about when we should start security for projects. Like when we could start security for programmers in general is in frameworks. Like the .NET framework, they did this really cool thing. So the OWASP group creates this thing called the OWASP Top 10, and it's vulnerabilities that pen testers just keep seeing over and over again, and they want to raise awareness. Well, what the .NET framework makers did is they took one of them and just they just changed the framework so it automatically eliminated one of them. They're like, don't worry, we got this. And they created this thing called the anti-CSRF token. So CSRF is a vulnerability where basically we all log into things all the time. Like, I don't know about you, but like I'll want to shop online. Let's say I'm going to buy running shoes. So I'll be super obsessive and like look at shoes for maybe like 4 days, and I'll be logged into, AliExpress or Amazon or someplace like that. And I just leave it open. Meanwhile, I'm like checking emails, doing other things. Right. And so if I clicked on a link in an email and if it was vulnerable to CSRF, it would potentially execute a command with my logged in account, with my credentials, and go do something. But .NET automatically now passes this anti-CSRF token so that users don't have to worry about this, but programmers don't have to worry about this. That's the beauty. That's the furthest left I can imagine, is that the dev just doesn't have to learn this anymore. Because I don't know, honestly, I wish that OWASP could kind of like meet with all the different framework makers and say like, hey, can we just eliminate the top 10, or can we eliminate like half of them? Could we set up some secure defaults with you? Can we do this? Can we do that? Like, I know that a little bit of that happens, but gosh, it would be so beautiful to have every single thing possible written into the framework. So, because devs have to learn so much already, anything we could take off of their plate and it's just handled perfectly for them and it's automated, like the anti-CSRF token in .NET. Yes.
Yep. I've had discussions with my friends, fellow devs about this before, where it's been like, okay, so traditionally, in much, maybe 3-4 years ago, MongoDB, when you installed it, didn't have any kind of security enabled on it, and anyone can poke at that database. But that's because the default tutorial is let's build they didn't call it this, but let's build an insecure MongoDB instance. I feel bad because feel like I'm picking on MongoDB, but it is something that happened. And I'm like, well, can't we just make the default tutorial, the 101 quick start guide? Okay, so you could do this, but now you need to set a secure password, and now you need to set multi-factor, and now you need to disable ports. Like, do that as part of the quick start for people, because like you were saying there, devs have to learn so much that you may only get 10 minutes to start playing around with a new technology before you have to then, oh, wow, I've got to just commit that into production, right? Because there's so many, I'm not saying that a lot of developers commit insecure code directly into production and know about it, but what I'm saying is that if we've got 2-3 hours to get to grips with a new technology, and then it has to be committed and has to, maybe they're doing the full DevOps lifecycle of push it straight to, doing the Netflix thing, push it straight to production and don't worry about it because it'll be fine. And I'm like, but you've just introduced this vulnerability that it's there by default, right? Can't we just set, like you were saying there about the framework developers, can't we tell all of the technology developers, look, just make it secure by default?
Yes. Yes, I actually would fight that fight with, so whenever I see documentation that's like that, and I used to work at Microsoft, so if I saw something and they would say set this to star, I would just descend on them. I'm like, hey, no. And they're like, well, we don't expect people to copy this and put it into prod. I'm like, they will. That's what devs do. That's what I did. I would go on Stack Overflow. I would find the top thing. I would paste it into my code. And if it compiled and it worked, I was like, sweet, next task. And whatever is voted at the top of Stack Overflow, you better believe it is the most insecure way to do anything because they've removed every barrier.
Mm.
And, the Microsoft Docs people would update things and like actually, do stuff. But on Stack Overflow, people are rather like one person can't say, oh no, it's not good if it has 2,000 upvotes, right? It doesn't matter if I'm like, well, I'm a security expert and I think this is bad because blah. People are, yeah, on page 32, you'll see Tanya's comment. But meanwhile, everyone's like, oh, this was voted up 2,000 times, gonna copy and paste, yeah, good. So the Stack Overflow people actually made a security area because they saw that happening and they wanted to help. And I thought that was really cool. So if you are a dev and you are looking up how to do something, you can look up what is the most secure way to do blah. And it will take you probably, a minute and a half instead of 30 seconds, but your code quality will improve immediately.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the other problems, right? I think so we've got, like I said earlier on, security itself is a huge topic. You've got app security, info security, cyber security, which again is a huge topic in itself. You've got all of these different branches of all of this stuff that you need to cram into your head as well as the code you're writing, the maybe the architecture, maybe you using microservices so you don't have to remember so much. But there's all this stuff that needs to go into your head, and I'm worried that because there's so much, right? You talked about CSRF there, so that's you said CSRF, CSRF, cross-site request forgery,
cross-site request forgery.
There's no, that's fine. There's sanitizing inputs. There's XSS, the cross-site scripting attacks, which hopefully are pretty much nullified by modern browsers. But who knows?
No, it's still there. Oh, definitely.
Well, there you go. You see,
I find it all the time, all day long. Sorry.
No, that's fine. You've also got SQL injection attacks. All of these things that you then have to I need to know all the security, right? So. Is it worth trying to do that hyperbole of know all the security? Or is it a case of, okay, I know how to do this one thing, and I'm going to look for all the places where that one thing exists and maybe suggest some changes? What would you recommend for devs who are looking at projects legacy or brand new projects and going, I think, should they look for all the security issues or just look for the one and report that?
So I actually teach secure coding because, I run a security school. And what I usually tell clients is, listen, if you can send all the devs on secure coding training, but then all of the ones that actually review pull requests, if you can get them to, so I call it the 17 commandments of like, if you want to write code that's good enough to put on the internet, you must do at least these 17 things. And so if you could just get them to do the top 3, just look every time for those 3, you will eliminate 80 to 90% of every type of bug just off the top. And they are input validation. So when I say input validation, I mean checking to see if the thing you're receiving is what you think it should be and that it's correct. I do not mean removing bad characters. And that's sanitization. And sometimes in super special cases, you want to do that. But a lot of devs are like, yeah, I validated the input in the user field. I'm like, did you validate the stuff in the URL parameters? Well, no. Did you validate the stuff that came out of the database? Why would I do that? Did you validate the stuff from the API? But I authenticated. Yeah. Every single input, assume anything. So I'm going to be very silly for a minute, but I joke like validate everything, even stuff from your mom, because my mom once sent me a virus and I opened it because she's my mom. And she's like a super intelligent person and like her computer got infected with malware, right? And she didn't send it to me. But the point is like, apparently if I can't even trust my mom, that means you can't trust the data from your database, from an API, from here, from there. And so if every single input is validated, and then second, every output to the screen, you encode it. If it's from the database, unless it's a label that you have programmed into your actual app, every single thing, if it's from anywhere, output encoded, just in case, even if it's from your database. And then the third thing is specifically for SQL or other database level injection is always use a parameterized query and never do inline SQL. So inline SQL is where you're like, oh, so what is your name? Oh, it's George. Great. So select star from table where name equals, and then that variable. That is inline SQL. Instead, you should call a query. So in SQL, it's stored procedures, but it's prepared statements in PHP, etc. And so instead, you call the get client data, whatever. And then it's like, oh, what are my parameters? Your parameter for username is George. Okay, great. And that takes away all the power from the thing. When you output and code, it takes away all the power. So if someone has put any code in there, it's like, I'm sorry, this is data. And I'm going to treat it like data, even if it looks just like code. And if everyone everywhere that reviewed code caught all those 3 things, even if they caught it 80% of the time, it would be magical. Like so many devs, they'll tell me, like when I was doing pen testing and more full-time AppSec, like, okay, I fixed it. Great. Me, I'm in. Them, what? I fixed it. I'm like, nope. And so eventually it's like, can I just come to your desk? Can we code together? Like, I don't mean to be a jerk, but can I drive? Like, let me. So then I started doing lunch and learns, and then that's how I started teaching. Because I would be like, I don't mean to be weird, but can I drive? Like, can I type? And then I would just be like, you do this and you create a regular expression and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out that is, when someone learns it, they can't stop seeing it. So like there's this junior AppSec person I'm working with, and we'll review code. I'm like, oh, it's there. Oh, it's there. Oh, it's there. Because you can't not see it. And we'll even review code in languages I'm not super familiar with, like PHP. I'm like, oh yeah, there. Oh yeah, there. And he's like, I'm like, once you get used to seeing it, you'll never be able to not see it. For the rest of your career, you'll be like, oh, that's an input that's not validated. Damn it. Now I have to report a bug.
Yeah, like I said at the start, right? It's the fundamentals. As long as we don't mean basic stuff, but the fundamentals, that the actual security things you need to be doing, they are platform, framework, and language agnostic, right? Like you were saying that, there's a SQL injection attack in PHP. There's I don't know.
No SQL injection attack.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly, right.
And also like an operating system level attack or a LDAP or whatever. Like if it accepts commands, someone's going to try to inject some.
Mm-hmm.
People are the worst.
Oh, they are. They are. I mean, as a real example, I think I've given this example on the podcast as well, but I'd like to tell you this example anyway. There was once a time when I ordered a pizza to be delivered from a large pizza multinational conglomeration who used to sponsor a lot of sporting events. It's probably not vague enough, but that doesn't matter. And the delivery instructions box was like, you could have 50 characters, and that's not enough characters to give the information to the delivery driver to find my house. Because over here in the UK, sometimes houses are difficult to find. And I right-click, inspect. Oh, it's even got jQuery on the page. Okay, selector.text equals, and I just typed it all in, and it skipped over the validation because the validation was happening on the field, not in JavaScript, not on the server, not in the database. And I remember, and I know that because when it got delivered to me, they put a little sticker on the box, and the sticker was like 3 times longer than the box. Because I just filled it with lorem ipsum as well, just to see what would happen. And it's kind of ridiculous. And that was just me messing around because I wanted to order a pizza and I needed extra space. I wasn't intentionally doing anything malicious. Someone malicious comes along, they may attempt to do some kind of injection attack or whatever, try to put some code into the database so that it's next read out. You take over that machine. And that company were vulnerable to that attack. And I found out accidentally. What if someone came along and was malicious about it, right?
So a lot of the reason why, like from a security perspective, people really want people to use content security policy header or all of those things, and why they have fields short is because if you are vulnerable to cross-site scripting, those little fields, like the 50 character limit, means that you actually can't write a really kick-ass attack. So what malicious actors usually do, if they find you're vulnerable to cross-site scripting, the first thing they do is call out to a malicious site so that they can put pages and pages of JavaScript in. So if they had found your vulnerability that you found, they could put a giant script in there, right? And do all sorts of things, assuming it was also vulnerable to cross-site scripting. And to be quite frank, around 2/3 of apps are, if you really, really look at them. And so that's why. So like if you can only make an attack that's 50 characters long, it's going to be like a message box or something, or like stealing a cookie or something. It's not going to be the same as the power someone could have of pages of JavaScript. And so, yeah, combine that vulnerability you found with some XSS. Oh yeah, game over.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you say, once you start seeing it, once you've seen it once, you do indeed see it elsewhere. And I mean, I could have gotten around that by there was some JavaScript on okay, so there was another website, right, that I used to use that it didn't have very good validation on the password field, right? It said you can use any number of characters you want, and well, the rules on the page were really good. It was like up to 100 characters and special characters and whatever you wanted, right? And that's great, because then I could just go password manager, fill in that field, generate one I don't even need to know. But every time I did it, it would fail. And I was like, well, why? It's telling me what I'm putting in is valid. So I jumped into the JavaScript, and in their submit method, they captured that form submit. And they were doing like lots of regexes in JavaScript to validate before sending. And I'm like, that's great, because I can just put a breakpoint in there, change that to true, and it passes, change that to true, and it passes, change that to true, and it passes. Or I can just short circuit it and just send the data. It's ridiculous. And it did, and I managed to send a 0-length password, and it crashed their website because the database accepted it, and they tried to hash a string that was empty and presumably divide by 0 error and took the website down. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything malicious. I just want to store my password.
Yeah, there's actually so there's software called a web proxy, and That's exactly what it does. Is it just lets you circumvent all of the JavaScript and you just get to talk directly to the web app. You're like, oh, I would like my password to be 35,000 characters. Thanks. And unless there's validation also on the server side, which PS is where you should put that validation, it's game over. It's so true.
It really is. It really is. So, let's, aside from WeHack Bubble and the ways to contact you and to learn directly from you and hire you and hire your team and stuff like that, what are some of the places that you, like maybe web resources, maybe books, hey, we can talk about the book, that listeners should look to get started in this journey, right? Because I feel like everyone should know this stuff.
So I am a big fan of OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. I also run an informal mentoring program every Monday on Twitter. And if you use the hashtag Cyber Mentoring Monday, every Monday on Twitter, I will retweet you basically and try to help you find a professional mentor. That's been pretty powerful and kind of awesome. There's also more self-promotion. Every month I'm going to be doing an open discussion about the chapters with Alice and Bob with a bunch of guests. And we're going to go through. So like this month, we went through all the fundamentals of security. Next month, we're going through security requirements for web apps. And all of those discussions and the recordings are free. And you can get all of it at aliceandboblearn.com. And lastly, I would join the security community. So that can be whether it be through like We Hack Purple as a community, but there's a whole bunch of online communities. So if you're a woman, there's WOSEC, Women of Security, or We Are Hackers. There's Katie Paxton Fear, Insider PhD. She has a community for bug hunters, and it's really good. There's just all sorts of. There's the Many Hats Club. That's a really good one. There's Women Cyber Jitsu. There's just like the list goes on of so many different really great groups where you can meet other people and kind of learn stuff together. Okay, so one last one is the OWASP Dev Slop Show. So I started that with my friend Nicole Becker, and my friend Nancy Garishe leads it up now. She's amazing. And basically once or twice a month, they have a bunch of guests and they live stream and do technical stuff together. And they've been teaching for free with me on the peripheral more recently because of my startup for years and years now. It's been like 4 years or something. And so, yeah, there's lots and lots of ways for you to learn, but having one or more people go along the path with you makes it so much easier and way more fun.
Excellent. Well, what I'll do is I'll get some links, put those in the show notes. So if you are listening through, just click through and check that out. So what I'd like to say, Tanya, real quick, because I know you have to sort of rush off, is thank you ever so much again for being on the show. And there were a lot of topics that we didn't get to talk about just because I have this great idea of hundreds of topics, and that kind of happens with me. I end up sort of waffling on and going on in different tangents. So, but thank you ever so much for helping out. And I feel like everyone should at least go get the book, because it is a fantastic book, I have to say. I think I got through it in about in one session. I was just like, yep, gotta keep reading. So,
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm actually planning, so my next course is secure coding, but then we're going to be making quote unquote language packs so one is like the general agnostic one, but then the next one, we're going to do like a deep dive into each language. I would love to come back on when we do .NET to give like some .NET secure coding secrets.
Sure, absolutely. The invitation is always there. Absolutely.
Thank you.
That was my interview with Tanya Janka about building application security into your projects and when to do it. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that. And to come back next time for more .NET goodness. See you again real soon. See you later, folks. .NET Core Podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.